I believe that my work is rooted in something that I call cultural amnesia therapy. I feel like the trauma that many people and communities experience can cultivate this kind of trauma that generates an amnesia, and people forget their history. My name is Marlon F. Hall. I'm a father to a Phoenix. My daughter Phoenix is the best thing since vegan sausage. She's good for you, good to you. I'm an artist, I'm an anthropologist. I'm a community engaged cultivator of imagination. Two things. I am dyslexic and dysgraphic, and I am passionately nosy. And so the two became one when Miss Gibbs, who is my 10th grade grammar teacher, I used to write papers about what I thought about the thesis of the subject for the assignment, and she would consistently say, I know that you have something to say, but I just can't read it because I was dyslexic and dysgraphic. So one day she said, do you have a camera? And I said, yeah, because my family had invited me to be the family documentarian, both with a picture camera and a moving picture camera, a VHS camera for family reunions. And I was like, yeah. She's like, well, the next report, I want you to use pictures and video to respond to the prompts of the thesis of the work rather than written language. And her experiment with giving me an opportunity to communicate in a language more tangible than written information transformed my life. And so from the 10th grade on, I set my sights on becoming a visual anthropologist, a person who could reverse engineer his questions around who, what, when, where, and how of communities and cultures, and use photography and filmmaking as a way to express responses to those questions. When I was studying visual anthropology in school, I went to the illustrious Fisk University and also Vanderbilt University. I would invite friends to come to my ethnographic film screenings, and nobody wanted to come to those. And so I'd be like, you know what about a visual poem? Would you like to come to my visual poetry screening? They'd be like, oh yeah, I'll come to that. And so the way that my ethnographic films move on the arc of a traditional narrative, it moves from left to right, driven by chronology or time, based on chapters, chapter after the next. Well, my films move more like poems from stanza to stanza, driven by the heartbeat of the subjects and scored by live musicianship from local contexts. So that's sort of how I express my visual anthropological practice with photography and filmmaking. When I first set my course in anthropology when I was in high school, I did want to be an archaeologist. I wanted to unearth antiquity from grit and grime. I wanted to be the first Black Indiana Jones without the whip. The vestiges of slavery won't allow that whip to be a part of my work, but I wanted to be the Black Indiana Jones who would go on adventures in the summer, teach during the school year, and then go on adventures to unearth bounty from what people think is everyday trash. I did not have the patience to be an archaeologist, because archaeologists' primary tool oftentimes is a toothbrush. So just using a toothbrush to sort of unearth the past. And then I recognized that my curiosity kind of was more in the spirit of what you call cultural anthropology, a division of it, which is visual anthropology, using pictures and videos to express what I'm learning from people, places, and things. So it just more powerfully resonated with how I, as an artist and an ethnographer or a social scientist, wanted to present what I was learning to the world. I wanted to be able to express it in a language that some say is more tangible than our history with words, something that was more deeply connected to our future, and that's in pictures. They say pictures is worth 1,000 words. And so I wanted to use images and video. And when it came to the subjects of my work, particularly, I believe that my work is rooted in something that I call cultural amnesia therapy. I feel like the trauma that many people and communities experience can cultivate this kind of trauma that generates an amnesia, and people forget their history. And it's hard for us to imagine who we can become when we've forgotten who we were. Memory and imagination are first cousins, and we can only imagine the bounty of the future from the beauty of the past. And so my work as a visual anthropologist was to sort of help communities that have suffered from this kind of trauma and have forgotten their heritage to use my large-scale photography as two things. Number one, a mirror through which they can see themselves as they are seen through their history, and then subsequently, a window through which they can imagine the possibility of the future. And I use large-scale photography in these communities because many of the people in these communities have been systemically erased or forgotten. And so I use these big-ass pictures of them in galleries and on the walls of underpasses and in public settings so that I can magnify the images of people whose identities have been minimized. I did an exhibition in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and I'm in Tulsa because of my passion for cultural amnesia therapy, because of a massacre that happened in 1921 of a community called Black Wall Street, Greenwood. And many of the people who were in that community before the press came along the past 10, 15 years did not even know that there was a Black Wall Street because of the trauma of the massacre covered up the history of the beauty and the wealth of the Black economy that was happening in the early 20s. And so I was commissioned by the Gathering Place, which is a local park, during the centennial of the 1921 massacre, 100 years from that, to do a large-scale photographic exhibition in their boathouse around Black history. And I gotta tell you, I was so traumatized by the history of the space because I had been there for a year working with PBS, working with Bloomberg Philanthropies, and working with Google to tell the story of the pain of the massacre, that I was exhausted. And I did not want to tell the story of the pain of the massacre the same way again. And so I said, you know, rather than me doing the traditional Black History Month exhibition that has its face to the past and its back to the future, why not see Black History Month as a time portal, as a portal that we can reorient time with our faces to the future and not turning our backs on the past to ignore it, but turning our faces to the future to feel the ancestral palms and fingertips of the heritage of Black Wall Street pushing us forward. And I called it Dear Black Future. And so it was an opportunity for all of Tulsa to come in to write a 4-word letter to the future of the Black community that had suffered such a horrific past. So in the midst of the exhibition that was 2 months long, I collected over 450 4-word letters to the future of the Black community. The images that I featured were images of students from Burroughs Elementary at the time, the first school to integrate in Tulsa. So there was one little girl that I was capturing while I was there, and the teachers were like, "No, you know, she's active." I don't know if you know what active means in the education system, but if you know, you know. And so we don't want to celebrate her by letting her be featured in the photo exhibition. I was like, well, I kind of disagree. And would you mind if I, with an assistant, took her on the playground to take some pictures with the supervisor? And so the three of us went out, and the composition of her face almost changed. Certainly the hue, the color, the energetic properties of her body. The crown of her head was over her shoulders. Her shoulders were over her hips. Her hips were over her heels. She looked like a different person as I was capturing her and just her, magnifying the images of a woman, of a little girl who the school was trying to, at the time, kind of erase from the project. And so I featured her image as a 16-foot tall and 20-foot wide image of her sliding off of this slide, and I caught her right as her heels hit the pavement off of the slide with this smile so big that it, left side of her mouth went right to her earlobe, right side of her mouth went to her earlobe. And the school came to visit. I don't know why I'm getting emotional now. The school came to visit the exhibition, and that same little girl walked in, and she saw her image, and I stood to her right. And she stood there paralyzed by her own beauty with her jaw dropped. And I said, who is that? And she looked at me, she said, I don't know, but she sure is pretty. I said, girl, you're right. I said, she is. I said, did you know that you were important before you saw that picture? She looked down and to the left, and she said, no. I said, do you know now? And she turned her chin and faced it towards mine and looked me square in the eye. And she said, yes, I do. So that yes, I do is the motivation for my work as an ethnographer, as a listener, as a storyteller, to present opportunities for communities who have been told, no, you can't. Yes, I do. While there was a massacre in Tulsa, and that there is reason to visit Tulsa with bouquets to commemorate the loss, there's also reason to visit Tulsa with baskets to honor the harvest, because there is nowhere like Tulsa where you can harvest the bounty of human resiliency. A community that suffered such a great loss is not a graveyard. Tulsa is not a graveyard, nor is any community that suffered from loss in that way, not alone. Those communities do need to be supported for the loss, not to negate that, not to negate the pain and the mourning of the loss. But Tulsa is not just a graveyard. Tulsa is a garden. And gardens have decomposed elements of life in them as well, but they move towards the beautiful cycle of life, death, and renewal. And so I'm hoping that my work can not just affirm the loss of communities that have suffered from systemic oppression, but also be used as a tool that unearths what we can all gain in the nature of human resiliency that these communities inherently have. They represent the fullest expression of being human, and many of them just so happen to be Black. And oftentimes, people say, it seems that your work begins with an activation of Black communities. When we serve, highlight, and celebrate Black communities, it's not an end. It's a means to the end of honoring all of humanity. Because when you bless Black folk, because Black folk are so generous, and also anthropologically speaking, they come from a place of origin. When you bless Black folk, you bless the cosmos. Because any opportunity that Black communities have to grow their capacity to contribute to civilization benefits, not just those communities. The sum total of human flourishing becomes more bountiful when Black folk have an opportunity to be fully human. One of the parts of my practice that have evolved out of pain is to make dinner tables out of native wood with an archival door at the center, a door that comes from that community, a door that's no younger than 50 years old, to literally sit at the center of the table, because I believe dinner tables traditionally are known as these horizontal surfaces on which we eat. I believe that because the meal is the very first institution known to man, before civil government, before religious institutions, it's the meal where we learned to be human. It's also a doorway, the meal is. It's a vertical portal through which we can access our own humanity through storytelling around a meal. And so Faisal and I designed a residency and a class, and subsequently, in partnership with the Dane County Food Collective, a movement, the Mosaic Dinner series, to cultivate a new imagination for how we can have conversations about challenges in society rooted in the first institution and grown out of story. I believe that transformation will happen in the world not through policy alone and not through our positions, but through story. Nothing holds a people in its palm like story. Story holds who we are. From continent to continent, culture to culture, family to family, it holds us. But story is so unique in that it's not just a place where our stories are held, it's a place where our stories are shaped by the fingertips too. And so story holds us as people in its palm, but story can also shape us with its fingertips. And the dinner table is a great place for the palm and for the fingertips to take shape. I think that so often, because storytelling is now intimately connected to economy, like capitalism has consumed story as a means to the end of making more money. If you look at commercials these days, commercials are not driven by the what the product is, the how the product works, or the where you can buy it alone. It's also driven by who uses the product, why they use the product, and how it makes them feel. Story. I learned that we all inherently have a desire not just to be good at telling our story towards some redemptive transactional end, but also we have a deep desire to hear, to learn how to hear another person's story. And so in Madison, I learned that storytelling is not as important in shaping the future as story listening. because I'm an ethnographer, I follow the lineage of a woman whose name is Zora Neale Hurston. Shout out to Zora Neale Hurston, who's like a spiritual mother to me. And she was a writer who did not create her art for and with communities without listening to them first, without immersing herself into the culture, to learn the dances, to learn the language, to learn how to speak in some of the bent ways that people speak, to wear her hair the way that people wear her hair. She was an anthropologist first. So my work has been driven by listening and then creating. But now my work is driven by creating places for listening. And so, yeah, I leave Madison knowing that I am not just responsible as a creative to listen, but as a creative to create spaces for listening. Can I tell you a story? Thank you. I was commissioned by the city of Houston, Mayor Anise Parker, and the Houston Arts Alliance to do a film series that told better stories to the city of Houston about the city of Houston, one folkloric person at a time. It was the climax of my career as a creative and an ethnographer. I was doing more than I had ever done in my life. And I was doing so much that my marriage turned to doo-doo. And one day my wife called, and the heaviness of her silence was so heavy, it was hard to hold. And out of the silence, she said, "You are doing more than we ever imagined you do. And you're no longer the man I married, and I want a divorce." And that sent me into a time of personal amnesia that some call depression. And I forgot what I could contribute, how I could contribute it, and most mornings, why to even get out of bed. So some friends of mine and I got some reclaimed wood from my big mama's house, two friends, Anthony Suber and Brian Ellison, and we turned it into a 12-foot long dinner table. And I first invited the subjects of that, the 16 subjects of that film series, to my home for a meal, and all of them were culturally and cognitively diverse. Nobody did the same thing for a living, but the only rule is that you could not talk about what you did for a living, only who you were for a life. You couldn't talk about doing. We all talked about being. There is one impression I hope to make on my daughter that she makes on her children, if she chooses to have them, on the future of the world in terms of her contribution, is that our doing is not as important as our being. And our capacity to do well for good is directly proportionate to our willingness to be well for good. That we will do no better than our being is well and healthy and cared for. So if there's any message that I want my life to resonate to my daughter, through my daughter, to the world, that message would be: do less, be more. My name is Marlon Hall. I'm a daddy, I'm an artist, I'm an ethnographer, and this has been the Layered Onion Podcast.